Okay, hi, Nick Veach here. Today this is another episode of, what is this called again? Counterpoint, in which I basically, throw out a few talking points of my own when listening to people discuss things. So often I think people miss various angles on arguments during debates. Anyway, today is Brendan ONeil versus Peter Hitchens. The issue is, should drugs be criminalized or not? Let's see what they've got to say on the subject.
Now, back to politics and drugs, and it remains to be seen if Michael Gove's confession that he took cocaine 20 years ago will prove fatal to his bid for the Tory party leadership. He says he now profoundly regrets.
Yeah, it's always kind of crazy. I mean, if you're going to go back 20 years into somebody's early years when they were, let's say, a young adult and they're experimenting with things, then you're going to say, they should be disqualified from doing something as if they never managed to learn anything in the intervening years. It's kind of crazy. People grow, people develop. Especially when it comes to something like drugs. It's not like you committed a murder or something.
That's his actions. The issue is caused.
And then, of course, there's the whole kind of fraudulence of where you say you regret. You remember Bill, not Bill Crystal, Bill Clinton did the kind of thing where he was asked whether or not he'd ever smoked marijuana, and he figured he couldn't defend. He couldn't deny it because it was too well known. So he said, well, he'd tried it, but he hadn't actually inhaled. And this is a kind of really weak-ass defense, which just makes you a laughing stock. And it's the same thing with this. With the guy said, if this particular politician had come back and instead of saying, well, he regretted it, deeply regretted it. I mean, come on. If instead he said, well, I enjoyed it. It was something that I experimented with at the time, but I grew beyond it. I grew out of it. And I'm a better person for it because I learned various things, positive or negative. Maybe I learned that the downside to doing drugs and what it does in terms of your productivity, your outlook, your worldview, etc. Or you could say it enlightened him. It helps him understand the public and the young people and why they get into drugs in the first place, how they become addicted, how to get out of, how to rise and grow out of addiction or whatever. What he should have done essentially is something a trick I used to do with people before when I was younger, when I was debating people all the time, was I'd take an error of mine and I would introduce it, not because I'd been discovered to have committed the error, but because I wanted to impress people with the fact that I could reveal the error and not be shy about it, abashed about it. B, show that I recovered from the error. B, and elaborate on the specific process with which I used to recover from it, and why I would no longer commit an error of that nature again. And in so doing, I would immediately, reveal my at the time considerable debating skills, and it would almost always left people kind of aghast, like, oh my God, do I have a prayer to taking this guy on in a discussion. This is the thing you should be doing. You should be operating from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness.
Some to question just how widespread drug use is in the political classes, and again has opened up the debate on whether drugs should or should not be legalized, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I presume it probably is quite common. When I was here in Taiwan, I was hanging out with a guy, a politician who had a very negative reputation. As being connected to the mafia, and a friend of mine knew somebody who knew the politician, and I spent basically a couple of days with the guy. And I was actually very positively impressed. Did he do drugs? Yeah, I did. I don't know exactly what he was doing. I can say his aide was doing meth or something like that, I think, and he spent like 3 hours dancing in front of a strobe to music. And you would think, okay, these are just a bunch of degenerates. Both the politician and his aide both use drugs. But actually what it was is just basically they were just, letting off steam. They worked hard. When I accompanied them, they went and dealt with the electorate. They met people. There was like kind of like another town hall, but kind of like a town hall, I guess, where the people would come in and ask questions or present their grievances or seek solutions to problems. He was very attentive. He was very, very, very earnest. And when the evening was over, he wanted to spend time with his girlfriend. He was married, but he had a babe on the side, probably had more than one. And he spent his time with her. We were out in the living room area and hanging out, and I don't do drugs. But I was just impressed with the fact that they worked hard, they played hard, and then the subsequent morning, it was either that morning or the morning after, I think it was remember the morning after, the guy who'd been smoking meth and dancing to a strobe light then drove, I don't know what it must have been, a couple hours north to work on. He was renovating his yacht. I mean, he was a hard-working son of a gun. I mean, so was the politician. I mean, and that politician actually eventually was caught with some drug-fueled party here in Taipei, and that was the end of his career. But what was interesting again was that it was not a matter of these people just being a bunch of like drunken inebriates if they were, you know, the alcohol equivalent of drugs. It wasn't that at all. It was that they worked hard and they played hard. So there's by no means is it necessarily the case that if you do drugs that you're some sort of degenerate. Not at all.
Brendan ONeil is the editor of Spiked Online. He believes that all drugs should be legalized. The Mail on Sunday's Peter Hitchens,
As do I.
says lax enforcement of drugs laws has allowed drugs to permeate every level of society.
Peter Hitchens has a lot of really interesting things to say, but I don't think he has a very organized mind, or maybe he doesn't present it as such when he's on these TV shows. Maybe in long form journalism he'd do better, but I don't find he performs very well. Unlike his brother Christopher, who passed on. Oh yeah, just a slight correction. I don't remember anybody smoking anything at that party. I don't think meth was smoked. I presume it was taken via pill. And we continue.
Including members of the political establishment, as we have seen. I've been talking to them. I started by asking Brendan ONeil why he thinks decriminalisation is the road to go.
I'm in favour of legalising drugs. I think if we're serious about the moral well-being of society, which I am...
This is a really weird argument, and not one that I would make, but...
Then we have to put a great deal of store next to the idea of moral autonomy and allow...
I think you're going to lose people on this one, man. Taking philosophical discussion, you just go with something like the numbers and that kind of a thing. If you're going to do the libertarian thing, associating it with morals, you're just going to lead people to think that you're coming from a Christian or a religious background of some kind. It's just going to lose a lot of people.
Allowing individuals to make decisions in their lives that they can then take responsibility for. I think the only way we can have a society of adults is one in which we have the greatest freedom possible, and a society which constantly micromanages everything people do, including their bad habits, and drug taking is no doubt a bad habit. That, I think, is going to be an unhealthy society and a divided society.
Peter, how
Yeah, I mean, I would go with arguments like drugs are already pervasive. Trying to criminalize them is just pointless because they're already criminalized and this has had no effect. Or you go with the example of Portugal, which I believe is decriminalized drugs and seen very beneficial outcomes with the amount of addiction. The addiction rates just plummeting. Or I could go with the example of the United States criminalizing alcohol and seeing what that did. That just empowered the mafia. Led to the criminalization of society across the board as the police force, the constabulary became bought and sold by the mafia. I mean, because if you're cops have a very dangerous job. If you want to ask police to take a low or a mediocre salary in exchange for putting their lives on the line on an almost daily basis, particularly when you're fighting a drug war, and you look at what's happening in Mexico, but even the United States too. I mean, it's very dangerous. The prospect of if you're a cop of say making a pile of money and then retiring early is very, very alluring. This is what you're going to do. I mean, it's certainly what I'm sure I would do. It's very easy to say that you'd be a moral person, but once you're in the thick of things, you've got a family, you see your friends being killed. What are you going to do? You're going to stick with this, and not to mention the fact you see that basically the efforts that you make, the work that you do, has no real impact on the amount of drugs available in the marketplace. So why wouldn't you just take the money and get out? The other thing I would add to that too is you could also use the example of Hong Kong. I mean, they are one of the arguments that when people talk about drug addiction, they talk about the addiction of the Chinese to opium. Although that's complete malarkey. The Chinese were not addicted to opium in my view at all. Again, an excellent example of that is Hong Kong, because when the British took over Hong Kong in 1842, there was a massive influx of Chinese from across the bay, from Kowloon, etc. And they very quickly had a population of several tens of thousands of Chinese. And there was at the time the idea was mooted that they should ban opium, right? Because the British government was trying to help the Chinese government ban opium. Despite what you've heard, that's actually what happened. Opium was illegal. The trade was illegal before the Opium Wars, during the Opium Wars, and after the Opium Wars. It was never legalized. The British never tried to legalize it either, because the British government was more than happy to work with the Chinese government to help them effect their ban on opium, and that's what they tried to do. What happened was that after the first Opium War, the Chinese government stopped trying to ban opium. They just abandoned the effort for reasons unknown. It's really bizarre. Well, I can offer for reasons, but that goes beyond the purview of today's discussion. But the situation in Hong Kong was such that let's say they had 30,000 Chinese. You have a population of Englishmen of, let's say, 300. You got 30,000, and you know, Chinese and more coming in all the time. The population is probably doubling every year. 30,000, 60,000, 120,000. And if you're, and everybody, basically Hong Kong, you have this hive of activity, a bustling society. People are working hard, and they're all smoking opium. So the government's position basically was, well, if we criminalize opium, hey, how are we going to enforce it? We're going to need law courts. We're going to have an army of translators, because the number of languages being spoken. There was Tanka, there was Hakka, there was Fujianese, there was Cantonese, there was Chaozhouhua. You know, in addition to English, right? You got half a dozen languages, at least, right, in the local area. But beyond that, it was the problem. The issue basically was that the Chinese, population would be estranged from the British government if you tried to ban opium, because everybody was using it. It was used not just as a form of recreation, but also as a pick-me-up, also as a way to stop you if you have various illnesses. There's pain relief. There's also if people drink bad water, they get the shits, so to speak. They get the runs, diarrhea. Opium is very effective at stopping diarrhea, and of course, in that day and age, you didn't have plumbing, indoor plumbing, so you're always in danger of drinking water, which is going to give you the runs. Opium was used all the time to stop that. So there was basically, if the concern within the British government was that if they estranged the Chinese population, at some point the Qing dynasty would become aware of this gap, of this divide, this abyss that was growing, and they would foment some sort of rebellion or insurrection, and they would actually throw the British out. So the British did not criminalize opium, and of course Hong Kong continued to be highly productive. And again, so it's a very sound argument against the idea that drugs are necessarily used by people to get high, when often they're used to put you in a certain state of mind, either to put you to with opium to help you sleep, or when you wake up to give you energy. It was used as a pick-me-up. I know that sounds strange, but think of alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. You go to a bar. If you drink to excess, you become, depressed. But if you drink light beer, and the way most of the opium people were smoking it in the day, because it was a very low morphine content, because they couldn't afford it. Most people working in Hong Kong, they're not wealthy. They're low, middle class to low to lower class, and they're smoking a very very stepped on, very diluted form of morphine, of opium. Excuse me. Anyway, so. These. Like I say, I wouldn't go with the moral argument, just because it sounds too churchy, too like it's coming from the mouth of a priest. And whether you're religious or not, it's just often not going to be a very persuasive argument, because the church is not in all that high, like good odor at the moment. Okay, maybe I should elaborate a little bit. What I meant by alcohol being a depressant and yet being a pick-me-up. You think of if you go to a bar, alcohol acts like a social lubricant, provided you don't drink too much. So you feel more at ease. You don't feel constrained. You feel like you can say what you want. You can get anything off your chest. You can, the real you can kind of emerge. So you become more energetic. You can speak about many more subjects. You become more verbose. That kind of thing. You get the gift of the gab. You start, whatever, throwing out a dog's breakfast of opinions on everything under the sun. It works as a pick-me-up, actually. And opium worked in kind of in a similar way, except it worked in a physical way, in the sense, because you'd have people carrying sedan chairs, the carriers, and they would smoke opium before they went to work, and it was observed by English and Americans that. After opium, they had much more kind of vim and vigor, and they were much more energetic and alert, and all the rest of it. And people were surprised to observe this, but this is actually how it would work. And by the same token, after the sedan carriers had finished their shift, whatever, then they would smoke opium to help them go to sleep. And then they woke up, they had more opium, and it was just a kind of a workaday drug. I mean, the modern day equivalent would be something like betel nut. Where people use it's a narcotic, probably kind of like a strong tobacco or a kind of coffee mixture together. I guess it has that kind of effect, so I'm told. And people who work just do that. It just kind of keeps you going. I mean, because I drink coffee. I'm guilty of exactly the same thing. I feed myself coffee and sugar, whether it's to make these videos or to write or to work as a translator or anything else. So it's the same thing. I'm using a drug just like they're using a drug to put me in a special place and to kind of give me a boost in terms of my abilities. Okay, I think I'll just wrap it up here. I don't want to keep going on and on about the drug war. I think I've said enough about this for the moment. Anyway, hope I said something useful. Hit the like button, subscribe if you like, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.